PFL finally had their champions versus champions fight card since the acquisition of Bellator. And unfortunately for PFL, the most interesting thing to come out of this entire event was a live Jon Jones interview where on air live, Jon Jones was confronted about the possibility of a future Francis Ngannou matchup. And Francis Ngannou was there live at the event as well. And Shaun O'Connell started off this interview. You could tell from the very beginning he had an agenda. He wanted to push a certain narrative. I'm not saying that it's wrong. We're going to get into that a little bit later when we look at the interview. But it gets a little bit uncomfortable. It gets a little awkward. It even gets a little bit unprofessional towards the end of the interview. It's almost like it's over, but then they're still talking, and Chael Sonnen is involved. And I thought it was very interesting, and I thought, you know what? The MMA media isn't going to cover this that much. I doubt any MMA YouTubers really cover this interview that much because probably not a lot of people even seen it. And I thought, you know what? Let me make a reaction video to this because there is a narrative that Shaun O'Connell is trying to set here. And if he could really get enough traction behind it, it might actually work. And I doubt that it does, but I really want the end goal, which the end goal is Jon Jones versus Francis Ngannou, which I believe is the super fight that got away. It's been the #1 fight I've wanted for the last couple years. And now that you have Francis Ngannou boxing the likes of Tyson Fury and now Anthony Joshua and potentially fighting the winner of this PFL event, the heavyweight fight, Renan Ferreira versus Ryan Bader, it just seems as days go by, it's just never going to happen. And, you know, I just really wish that we could one day get Jon Jones versus Francis Ngannou before it's too late. Before it's too late. If you've been a fan for, the last 10, 15 years, you already know Anderson Silva GSP got away. How are we going to let Ngannou versus Jon Jones get away? And that's why I wanted to make this video. Because at the end of the day, what Shaun O'Connell wants, and I have to applaud him for it, he wants to kind of pressure the UFC to make Jon Jones versus Francis Ngannou. We're going to talk about whether or not that's a possibility later in the video, but let's start off right away with the interview. We're going to skip over a little bit. By the way, Chael Sonnen's involved in this interview. Chael Sonnen notoriously hates Jon Jones. He talks shit about him all the time. He delegitimizes Jon Jones, delegitimizes Francis Ngannou, but he was kind of sucking up to Jon Jones in this interview. And I already skipped ahead about 30 seconds. By the way, I will link this full interview down in the description if you want to go check it out for full context. But we're going to look at the majority of it in this video because it's only 5 minutes long. But Chael Sonnen sucking up to Jon Jones, looking away, feeling a bit uncomfortable, taking up for Jon Jones, saying, oh, Jon Jones is a little bit uncomfortable. Let me kind of bail him out with a question here. But I just wanted to point that out. That's not that important. But let's start right away. This actually isn't really Jon Jones talking. This is going to be Shaun O'Connell's very first question. And he's already sowing the seed of where he's heading with this interview from the very first question. Jon Jones' answer isn't going to be that important. I'm going to cut it off really quickly. But Shaun O'Connell's question is what we're looking at here. This is the very first question of the interview.
PFL versus Bellator. Now look, cross-promotion, co-promotion, the joining of two great MMA powerhouses is something.
Cross-promotion, co-promotion, the joining of two great MMA powerhouses. And he's talking about PFL. He's talking about PFL versus Bellator. But he's getting at something a little bit later. And I actually started it up there and talked over it. But you get the point.
Asked for a very long time in this sport. PFL acquires Bellator, puts a card like this together. Just as a fight fan, because I know you are a fight fan.
I am.
Is that something you wanted to see?
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. It's just great to see.
So there you go. We don't need to hear Jon Jones' answer. I just wanted to show you the way Shaun O'Connell started off this interview. Cross-promotion, co-promotion, something the fans have wanted to see for a long time. Now we're getting Bellator versus PFL. He's setting up the narrative of a potential fighter from PFL cross-promoting with a fighter from the UFC, aka UFC champion Jon Jones. Now, in this next clip, he already starts to kind of push that. I'm going to skip ahead a little bit. We don't really need to see Jon Jones' answer. That's a waste of time. He asked him flat out about Francis Ngannou. Listen to this.
Now, there's been a lot of talk over the years about who the best heavyweight mixed martial artist on the planet is. Obviously, you've made the transition to the heavyweight division.
Jon Jones looks over at Francis Ngannou, who's in the crowd, and we'll see his reaction. It cuts away to Francis Ngannou a couple times, cuts back to Jon Jones. They actually have like a little kind of stare down in the camera. It's kind of a weird thing, but you'll see it.
Francis Ngannou exited his contract with the UFC as the...
Shaun O'Connell said exited his contract. Thank you, Shaun O'Connell, because the UFC and the UFC shills are like, yeah, Francis Ngannou got released. Francis Ngannou got cut. No, Francis Ngannou fought out his deal. He fulfilled his obligation, and he left the UFC under his own free will. That's what he did, and he went to another organization.
The heavyweight king, he's over here with the PFL now. He's transitioned into boxing. Anthony Joshua fight coming up next month, by the way. But the claim is out there, the baddest man on the planet. Who is it, Jon Jones?
What do you guys think out there?
Jon Jones handles this interview perfectly, because I do believe if Dana White sees this interview, he's going to be a little bit pissed off. But Jon Jones handles it in a way where Dana can't really be pissed off at him. Because what Shaun O'Connell's trying to do here, he wants some type of kind of soundbite or clip that can be helped to propel demand for Jon Jones versus Francis Ngannou. And listen to the way Jon Jones handled this.
You know, I don't feel like I'm at a place in my life where I need to toot my own horn. I think my body of work speaks for itself.
Absolutely it does.
I think my reception from the MMA enthusiasts speak for itself.
By the way, if Jon Jones needs somebody to toot his horn, he just needs to sign a contract to fight Michael Chandler. Or not even sign a contract to fight Michael Chandler. Just sign up to coach The Ultimate Fighter with him. I'm sure Chandler will do plenty of tooting for him.
And I'll just leave it at that. I've never lost a fight. I'll just leave it at that.
Jon, you're being...
Then Chael Sonnen asked him, how do you feel about Francis Ngannou versus Anthony Joshua? Who do you think's going to win, Ngannou or Joshua? Jon Jones says, I'm rooting for Ngannou, but I think Anthony Joshua is going to win. We're not going to look at that whole clip. That's another minute that we don't need to look at. But when we pick back up, at the part I start back up, is going to be kind of Ngannou's response in the crowd to Jon Jones saying, I think Anthony Joshua is going to win. That is the response from Ngannou. And then we get to the next question, where Shaun O'Connell is really pushing this Ngannou, Jon Jones narrative.
I appreciate that.
Before we let you get out
Sorry,
of here...
buddy. Sorry, Francis.
Before we let you just enjoy your evening watching these fights, Jon, it is a new era in mixed martial arts in a lot of different ways. You mentioned the global expansion, this card tonight, and the way that the PFL acquired Bellator and brought these things together. Fighters have more control over their careers now than they ever did. Not total control, I'm not trying to suggest that, but a man of your credentials has a certain amount of influence when it comes to making matches for himself, when it comes to plotting out the last few fights of his career. Is the Francis Ngannou fight something that you would be interested in pursuing, even if it meant that it would have to be unprecedented, it would have to be a crossover that we've never seen before?
By the way, great question by Shaun O'Connell. Basically, in layman's terms, Shaun O'Connell is saying, is there any desire from you to put pressure on the UFC to attempt to make a cross-promotion fight with the PFL against Francis Ngannou, since it would be such a mega fight? That's what Shaun O'Connell's asking, and Jon Jones kind of avoids the question here, kind of gives a little bit of a non-answer, but I think Jon Jones did a spectacular job in this interview, not really giving Shaun O'Connell what he wanted.
You know, I feel like there's a lot of fights that the world wants right now. You know, the Tom Aspinall fight still, that's really massive. Francis Ngannou and I would be really massive.
So listen to that. Tom Aspinall, really massive. Francis Ngannou, really massive. And then listen to the way he talks about Stipe Miocic.
And Stipe, to the hardcore fans, it's still a respectable opponent.
Is he trying to convince us, or is he trying to convince himself? And Stipe Miocic, still a very respectable opponent. I only got one dude on my mind. Stipe Miocic is a dead body. He's been out for 3 years. Going to be over 3 years. Going to be 3.5 years by the time you actually fight. His last fight, he got folded like a lawn chair by Francis Ngannou. Literally, it's crazy. Nobody wants the Stipe fight. Not the hardcores. Nobody wants it, Jones. Stop trying to convince us that people want it. Nobody wants it.
I don't know how the cards are going to fall. My prediction is that I will beat Stipe Miocic. My prediction is that I will beat Tom Aspinall and Francis Ngannou. So the way that it unfolds is really not my business. My job is just to do what I've always done since day one.
So listen to what Francis Ngannou says here, because this is going to end up being a meme. Francis says, in your dreams, but listen to what he says next.
Well, it's great to see you here.
I believe he said so fucking fat. I'm already waiting for that GIF to end up in my Twitter mentions soon. So I thought that was pretty funny. But great answer from Jon Jones. He basically says, look, I don't know what's bound to happen. I don't know what's in the cards. I'm not worried about that, but I believe I will beat Stipe Miocic. I believe I will beat Tom Aspinall, and I believe I will beat Francis Ngannou. And this is where it starts to get a little bit awkward because Shaun O'Connell is really pressing the issue with Jon Jones. And you can tell Jon Jones is like kind of, playing both sides a little bit and sitting on the fence of, I don't want to piss off Dana White in the UFC, but I kind of want to give you an answer here.
We appreciate you giving us some time.
Thank you.
It's almost like it's going to end here, but it doesn't. It goes another minute and 30 seconds.
Jon Jones. And look, Francis is in the building. Maybe we'll hear from Francis here in a few minutes. Cheers,
I was impressed with Jon. I thought Jon answered our questions honestly. A lot of guys beat around the bush. I appreciate.
First off, there's Chael sucking up to Jon Jones again, as they're showing Francis Ngannou, who Chael Sonnen hates with a burning passion, by the way, because Chael Sonnen's a UFC shill. But anyway, they're talking as if Jon Jones already left. Jon Jones didn't leave, and there's another minute of the interview.
Appreciate that answer.
Thanks, Chael.
I do want to see that fight. I know that there's a lot of things standing in the way of making it happen, but I do want to make the point that the Professional Fighters League is not what's in the way of that fight happening. MMA fans can get what they want. Jon Jones said he'd be interested in it. Francis has expressed his interest in it. If only we knew the one thing standing.
Look at that shit-eating grin from Jones. Look at that. Look at this shit-eating grin from Jones. He's like, you're going to get me in trouble with Dana White. Because what Shaun O'Connell is referencing here, Ngannou's interested, Jon Jones is interested, the PFL's interested. Well, who's in the way? There's only one option. It's the UFC. It's Dana White. The UFC and Dana White is the one entity / person that's in the way.
Thank you, Jon Jones. We've got more fights to get to here on the biggest card in PFL history, the biggest card in Bellator history. And I'm not going to shy away from this.
No,
You probably thought it was going to end there. It's not over yet.
Causing a real problem. You really put Jon on the spot with that. But
he's saying, Chael's acknowledging that it's a little bit uncomfortable. You're putting Jones on the spot. The UFC and Daddy Dana sees this. Chael's a UFC shill. Dana's going to be pissed. Chael knows that.
My intent is not to put Jon on the spot. My intent is to pay respect to what the fight fans in the world want, which
That is facts. If you don't want to see Jon Jones versus Francis Ngannou, shame on you. That is the fight that the fans should be getting behind. That is the fight that the fans want to see. But because Dana White and the UFC wanted to be greedy and lock Francis Ngannou down to a long-term deal that didn't have any freedom to box, which was a dream of Francis Ngannou, that is why this fight can never happen, unfortunately. But we'll listen to the rest of this.
I consider myself a huge fight fan as a former fighter myself.
And you did.
I want to see Francis Ngannou and Jon Jones decide who the baddest man on the planet is.
And then, of course, you got the YouTube pop-ups. But there's also a little virtual stare-down between Jon Jones and Francis Ngannou here, kind of.
I want to see it, and I want to see it soon.
Me too, Shaun O'Connell. And then Jon Jones has a shit-eating grin, and he's about to have a stare-down kind of with Ngannou, but kind of the camera.
I'd watch them arm wrestle right now.
So there's it. That's the entire interview. There it is. I don't know why I said there's it. But, yeah, Shaun O'Connell is clearly pressing the message that the fans want to see it, Jon Jones wants it, Francis Ngannou wants it, but the UFC is the one roadblock in the way. Now, could this fight ever happen? Because I know people are going to kind of ask that question down in the comments. Well, is this ever possible? It's highly unlikely. But the only way that it could become possible is if there's so many fans just constantly pressing for this fight. So you need to tweet to Dana White. There needs to be comments on Dana White's Instagram page. There needs to be nonstop fan. Imagine that was the main event for 300. I know Jon Jones is injured, but let's forget about that. Imagine we had Jon Jones versus Francis Ngannou. That's a fight. That's the one that got away. It's so unfortunate that we're most likely never going to get the fight. Because the UFC, and I'm not blaming the UFC for not cross-promoting. I don't believe they'll ever cross-promote with an entity such as PFL unless they grew a lot bigger. Because the UFC says basically we're lifting them up. We're elevating them. But if the fans wanted it enough where it's going to sell 10 million pay-per-view buys, not that that's going to happen. That's not a realistic number. Dana White would be forced to do it. Ultimately, I don't think it ever happens. But I love the fact that Shaun O'Connell was essentially trying to get some type of soundbite clip that was going to have promotion, a little bit of promotion, behind Jon Jones and Francis Ngannou that people could look at. Jon Jones kind of avoided it altogether. Well, I think I'll beat Ngannou. Well, I don't know what the future holds. I don't know what's in the cards. But I respect Shaun O'Connell for trying to make a push for Jon Jones versus Francis Ngannou. Does it ever happen? Unless Francis Ngannou gets re-signed to the UFC, absolutely not. I don't think the UFC will ever cross-promote with another MMA organization unless something changes, drastically in the future, but I doubt it ever happens. They don't want it. They're never going to. Who's Francis Ngannou? Remember Dana White was acting like Jon Jones would have destroyed Francis Ngannou. That's the one fight we all want to see, and we're never going to get to see it. So let me know what you guys think of the interview down in the comments. Don't forget to like the video. Don't forget to subscribe, and thank you so much for watching.